This is Jack with Jack Harrison Survival, and today we're making a gourd canteen. So stick around for more. So in a survival situation, having a water container is really important. It's probably one of your most valuable items in a survival situation. So right here I've got my preferred container, and this is a stainless steel 72-ounce clean canteen, wide mouth. And I like these, any stainless steel uninsulated water bottle, because you can boil water in them. Now, in the event you didn't have this, and somehow you had a container gourd, which, you know, these do grow in certain areas, so it's not that uncommon to find them. They're planted all over the place in the United States and throughout the world, especially in tropical areas. And so it's really not that uncommon to find these growing wild. That being said, making a water bottle out of a gourd is also really fun. You don't just have to make a water bottle. You can make a ladle, you can make a rattle, you can make a bowl like this one here. You can burn cool designs into it. You can do a number of things with a gourd. And so we're going to be talking about how to turn this gourd into a water container. When selecting a gourd, make sure that you're getting a container gourd. Basically a thick-walled gourd that has been dried and doesn't have any major cracks in it. Now some of these will grow with extremely thin walls. Ideally we've got nice thick walls, because what that's going to do is allow us, and maybe you guys can see here, this wall is probably almost half an inch thick. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow our container to be more durable, and it's going to let us be a little bit more aggressive with cleaning it out. So step one is getting a nice gourd. Step two, deciding what you want to make. Now, sometimes you will have the luxury of deciding what you want to make, and other times you're just going to have to go with what the gourd wants to be. What I mean by that is these gourds don't all come in the same shapes and sizes. Maybe you have a gourd that is really small or shaped in a particular way that it's going to be used as a rattle. Or maybe your gourd is quite large and round and there's no way to make it into a water container or a water bottle, so to speak, but it would make a much better bowl, right? Now, that being said, in a survival situation, you can cut open any gourd, clean it out, and you can use it to store water. It really doesn't matter what shape it is. I'm talking aesthetics here. Having a huge pumpkin-shaped water bottle might not be ideal for you. Not only that, but it's going to be really hard to carve a plug for it. Anyways, we've got this gourd here. It's nice and dry. It still has some of the mildew and mold that grows on the outside when they're seasoning. So let's talk about the tools that we're going to need to process this gourd. The most important tool that you'll need, if you have a choice and you can only pick one tool, would be a Swiss Army knife or some multi-tool that has a saw. The saw is really important in this process because it allows you to cut the gourd open. You can use any type of saw, whether it be a hacksaw. I prefer a saw that has kind of fine teeth on it, so a hacksaw is ideal. The reason I like the Swiss tool is because it's got the saw, it's got the locking blade, and then it's got, other tools I can use, like this can opener I can use to scrape out the inside. It's also got a hook knife here that I can use to scrape out the inside. So there's a variety of tools on this tool alone. Not only that, but I could use the butt of the tool to scrape out the inside of the gourd. So you need either a saw or a Swiss Army knife. If you don't have a Swiss Army knife and you just have a saw, then you probably want to have a knife as well. It's not necessary, but having a knife is handy. And really you can finish one of these things with just a knife and a saw. If you have the choice, a little sandpaper is good, because you can use the sandpaper to take this funky outer layer off the gourd and get that beautiful amber color underneath. You do want to get this funky stuff out because it's mold and mildew, and what it'll do is it'll make the inside of your gourd more prone to molding, which is something we don't want. Lastly, either a spoon, a knife, or some type of tool. These are pieces of chert and flint and basalt that I have left over from flint knapping, and basically I use these to scrape out the inside. So anything really rough, like a coarse stone or something that you can use to scrape or abrade the inside of the gourd to get all of the material out from the inside. And we'll talk about that more later. But those are your basic tools. So to go over them one more time, a saw, some sandpaper, a knife, and some type of scraping tool. So the first thing we're going to do before we cut our gourd canteen open is we're going to take our sandpaper and we're going to sand it. Now you could also use sand from a creek or a river or dirt and water to get this job done. But you can see here that just with some light sanding, it's taking off that outer layer and it's exposing the shell of the gourd. Not only do I prefer the way it looks, but also, like I mentioned earlier, leaving this stuff on the outside of the gourd will make the inside more prone to molding mildew, which gourds are already fairly prone to that in general. So we're just gonna keep sanding away until we get this thing nice and clean. Okay, so I got a good amount of this mildew off of here, and for now this is fine. I'm gonna hit it with a heavier grit sandpaper later on, and then come back with the fine stuff. But if I was really wanted to get this thing fully clean and I wasn't filming, I would just go ahead and spend another 20 minutes just sanding out all these little low spots on here to get the gourd looking consistent with none of these mildew spots on here. So the next step is going to be cutting the gourd open. So there's two things you need to think of here. One, where do you want to cut the gourd? So when you cut the gourd, obviously that's going to dictate what your final product is going to look like. So we could cut it right here and remove a section here and have kind of a ladle kind of type deal. This gourd doesn't really fit that in my mind. We could cut it down here and we could get a bowl, much like the one I've made over here. We could cut it a little higher up about here and get a little bit of a canteen there, kind of like a pot slash bowl slash canteen. We could cut it way up high and get almost like an old jug out of it. It's kind of like one of those old medieval wine containers. And we could also just cut it in the center like I'm going to do, and we'll get two separate containers out of it. First thing I'm going to do is I pick my spot. So the important thing when you're cutting the gourd open is you don't want to cut all the way through in one shot, because that is likely to crack the gourd. So when you start cutting it, pick your spot and cut partially through, basically like create a cut mark that goes part of the way through the gourd all the way around. And then once you've done that, you can go a little deeper and a little deeper until you break through. And once you break through, then it's safe to cut all the way through. But it's important to score the gourd first. So as you can see here, I've scored the gourd. So I'm going to continue scoring it, and just to show you guys what that looks like, just going nice and slow, making sure I'm getting a straight cut. It's really easy to kind of go off at an angle, so you want to take your time with this, because you can fix it if you do cut it at a funky angle, but if you're trying to get two separate containers out of one large gourd like this, you really need to be aware of where your scoring is going and that it's going to connect. Okay, so I've scored pretty much all the way around the gourd through that outer shell, just like this. So now I'll go ahead and start cutting through it. So when I'm cutting through it, I don't want to put any torque on the gourd. I just kind of want to let the saw do the work. I don't want to be bending the gourd at all. And again, I'm going to use that same technique of turning the gourd and carefully cutting through. Okay, so I've broken through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to follow up with that cut until this one breaks through. And once I've broken through, I can just go ahead and start cutting all the way around. There we go. So here are our two containers. We've got it cut. We're going to start with this one here. So let's just set this one aside. Now let's talk about cleaning the gourd out. So I just wanted to show you guys what the inside of the gourd looks like. And it's hard to do that without a flashlight. But you can see there's a bunch of stuff in here, and all of this stuff is super bitter, and we need to scrape it out. So let's go ahead and talk about how to clean the inside of the gourd out. So step one is just taking some type of coarse abrader, whether that be a scraping stone or like a heavy piece of sandstone or pumice or something that you can use to scrape the inside of the gourd out. Now some people really like to use spoons. So first thing I'll do is dump the seeds out. Now these seeds you may want to consider keeping to plant some container gourds of your own. So now I'm left with all of this funky stuff in here, so I'm going to start scraping it out. And the biggest thing you want to watch out for when you're scraping is not to crack your gourd. So if I didn't have this stone tool, what I could also use is my knife. Make sure it's a locking blade, it's not going to close on your finger. And I could take my knife and use my knife as a scraper. Now it's not ideal, depending on the contour of your blade, but it will work. And I actually got some of this gourd dust in my mouth, and I can taste it, and it's really bitter. And I'll show you guys what this looks like. Now you don't want to carve into the gourd. You just want to scrape that layer off. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue to scrape. So once you've got your gourd all scraped out, you'll want to go ahead and you'll put some boiling water in there. If you can't do boiling water, then just put water in there. But the idea here is that you want to leach the bitterness out of the sides of the gourd, right? So the walls of the gourd are full of this bitter, gnarly stuff, and we try our best to scrape a lot of that off, but if we don't use water, it's going to continue to be bitter. I don't know exactly what it is inside the gourd that makes it bitter. I believe it's tannins, but I'm not a gourdologist, so you would have to reference a gourdologist for that. I'm just a guy who really likes to live in the woods. Once it's cooled down, we'll come back, we'll see how bitter it is, we'll add some water, we'll let it sit for a second, we'll take a little sip of that. And if it's not bitter anymore, then go ahead and be done with it. If it's still bitter, we'll do a second boil or second steeping. So we're done leaching what's left of the lining of the inner gourd. We finished scraping it and then we filled it with boiling water. And now at this point, we're pretty much ready to drink out of it. Anything beyond this is basically for aesthetics and a little bit for functionality. And now it's time to do a little bit of sanding on the inside of the gourd and kind of clean it up a little. So what I'm doing now is I'm sanding the inside of the gourd with some coarse grit sandpaper. If you don't have sandpaper, you can always use like a nice rock like this. This works especially well in this situation because this gourd has such a narrow mouth on it that it's hard for me to reach in there. But all I'm really doing right now is just smoothing the inside out. When you scrape it, it does have a tendency to get kind of scored up a little bit. And the reason you want to smooth it out is because it creates a more even surface for the liquid or whatever's inside the gourd to dry on or be cleaned out. Again, these gourds are really prone to molding if they're not cleaned and maintained properly. So we just want to do our best to make sure that the inside of our gourd is going to stay as clean as possible. So I'll just keep sanding the inside out with this rock. And then once I'm done doing that, we'll make a little bag for it. So we're going to take this jute twine and we're going to make ourselves a little net baggie to carry our gourd in. I'll do a separate video on how to do this in detail. For now, I'm just going to make a really quick and easy one. You could use any material for this, whether that's torn pieces of cloth, fibrous leaves like yucca or palm, or cattail, or natural cordage you've made, whether that's 2-ply or up, or paracord, anything for that matter. First thing I'm going to go ahead and do making this bag is I'm going to tie a small loop on here, and I'm going to leave some tag ends on both ends.
try and do this so you guys can see. There are many different ways of doing this. I'm just doing it the quickest, it's the most simple way I can come up with. Okay. So I've got my loop tied around the top. I've got 2 pieces hanging off here. Now what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to attach more strands by just running them, taking it, doubling it up, taking that end, running it through, and pulling this through. And you can do as many of these as you want. If you want the weave to be tighter, add more. If you don't really care, you can just add a couple, 2 or 3. I'm just gonna do 3 total, so this is my last one. So I've got my 3 strands here, and now it's really easy. All I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the 2 strands that are closest to each other, and I'm gonna tie them together. And I'll do this all the way around. Just do an overhand knot using both of them, tie them together just like that. Take these 2, tie them together. It doesn't have to be perfect or even. And this isn't necessary, this is just a way to carry your gourd. They can be kind of awkward to carry if you don't have a little bag or something to keep them in. So I've tied them together all the way around. Now I'll just do the same thing with the bottom strands that are left. So I'll take these 2 strands here. So now we'll do a couple more rounds. If it starts to get loose or funky, just pull it down tight. That one's a little big, but I should probably retie it. And if you tie one that's too big, doesn't fit with the rest of the little triangles you're creating, just retie it. So at this point, we've got our little net bag pretty much. A couple of these are a little bit big, but that's okay. Doesn't need to look perfect. But this will hold our container really nicely. We can tie an attachment up there. There's a few different ways to close this up. The most fast and simplest way is to just tie an overhand knot at the base with all of these. And like I said before, I'll make a video on how to do this for those of you who are interested, because there's definitely nicer ways of ending the net. So there we go. We've got our little net here. Now we can just attach our holders either side. So we can just take either one piece of twine and tie it on, and I'll just do that for now. Or you can make a braid. There we go. Trim the bottom up. Now we can carry our gourd with us. It's not beautiful, but it's functional. It only takes about 5 minutes to make. So we're done with our gourd so far. Just enjoying some water out of it. It's a hot day. We've got our bag so we can carry it and not have to worry about it spilling or falling and breaking. The last thing we need is a lid or a cork. Now, a really simple way to do this is to just find a green branch that's about the diameter of the opening on your gourd, cut it, whittle it into a bit of a taper, and just stick it in there. Biggest thing you need to be careful of is if you push it in really hard, you could crack the rim of the gourd. So it's a friction fit, although you don't want it to be really jammed in there tight. Things you can do to create a water seal would be to carve a little notch around the base and tie a little bit of twine in that notch. Use a rubber band, something like that, to create a seal. And I'm not going to be making a cork in this video just because we're getting, we're already at almost 30 minutes and I feel like we've covered a lot. The situation where you wouldn't use a cork is if the mouth of your gourd is just extremely wide. At that point, you don't really need one. You just want to make sure you have a bag so that this thing stays upright. Gourd containers are awesome. They've been used for a really long time. They're really, really easy. All you have to do, sand the outside, cut it where you want to, scrape out the inside, put a little water in there, keep scraping out the inside, and then once you've done that, let it dry out, sand the inside out, get it nice and smooth, make a little bag for it if you want, so you can carry it, fill it up with water, and drink out of it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe or give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see videos on anything in particular, leave a comment. I'd be happy to do a video on whatever skill or craft you'd like to see, as long as I'm able to do it. And maybe I'll see you guys in the woods. In the meantime, check out my website at jackharrisonsurvival.com or find me on Instagram at jackharrisonsurvival.